This is the new Polestar 4, and it's strange for a few reasons. Let's start with probably the most unusual thing about this car, and that is the fact that it has no rear window. There is still a rear view mirror, but it's actually an HD screen that displays a live feed from a roof-mounted camera. You can deactivate this if you want, and it shows that it is actually a mirror, but it doesn't show you the outside world, it just shows you the rear seats. Polestar says, of course, there are a number of benefits to this setup. For example, it gives you a wider view of what's behind you than what you get in a regular car with some glass here instead. And also at night, this is supposed to work brilliantly well because it displays what's behind you on a very bright screen. But what's this actually like in the real world? Well, when do you use your rear view mirror? Hopefully, you use it when you're reversing to be able to see what's behind you and to also judge how far away you are from what's behind you. And in that scenario, this is pretty much useless. In a normal car, like this Nissan X-Trail for example, you can look out directly through the rear window. And that obviously gives you some perspective on how far away you are from what's behind you without having to rely on a reversing camera. But in the Polestar 4, there's no kind of visual reference point on here to help you judge those distances. So look, it's like I'm about to crash straight into the X-Trail when in reality, I'm actually very far away from it. Luckily, you get a full suite of cameras as standard, which includes a 360-degree camera, a rear view camera, and also a front-facing camera. So these down here are very helpful. But in this basic low-speed reversing situation, this is no help at all. The other time you'd want to use your rear view mirror is, of course, just when you're regularly driving to know what's happening behind you. And to be fair, this is a high-resolution screen. It gives you a wide view of what is behind you, but it still has the same problem that you aren't really sure how far away you are from what you're looking at in the rearview mirror. We have though tested this in torrential rain at night, so pretty much the worst conditions imaginable, and to be fair, it does still give you a clear and impressive picture of what's going on behind you. But ultimately the question is this better than a mirror and some glass? And the answer is no. Anyway, it's not just the lack of a rear window that's strange about this car. It's the car itself which is a bit odd because, as we'll explain, it's quite difficult to pin down into one class of car. So what is it? Well, to directly answer that question, it is the latest electric car from Polestar, following the Polestar 1, the Polestar 2 and the Polestar 3. But even though it's the Polestar 4, it actually fits between the 2 and the 3 in terms of size and price. And this isn't just a coupe type version of the Polestar 3. It obviously looks completely different and it's built on a different platform as well. And even though this is a little bit smaller than the Polestar 3, this is still a pretty big car. It's more than 4.8 meters long, it weighs more than 2.2 tons, but can you put this into one category of car? Because it's not really tall enough to be an outright SUV, but then it doesn't have the low profile you'd expect from a kind of four-door coupe either. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that you can't specifically put this into one class of car. And we reckon that this is going to be cross-shopped, seen as an alternative to other premium electric cars like the Audi Q6 e-tron, the BMW iX3, and also the key rival of this car, the Porsche Macan Electric. Now, obviously, this is a major talking point with the Polestar 4, but it's not the only thing to discuss. And really, this interior should be the star of the show because you can see it is full of really plush materials. It is beautifully screwed together and it's got this really attractive, sleek layout as well. So, especially by expensive electric car standards, this looks and feels like a top-notch interior. And it also gets a pretty good infotainment system as well. Every Polestar 4 gets this 15.4-inch touchscreen, which is mounted centrally on the dashboard here. And with other Polestars, we've seen a portrait layout. This has a landscape one. And the system itself has been developed by Android, so it includes things like Google Maps and Google Assistant as standard, which means straight out of the box, the sat-nav and the voice command system is way more effective than lots of other infotainment systems developed by manufacturers themselves. You also still get Apple CarPlay as standard. And the screen has an attractive layout. These graphics are very pleasant. It's a big screen, obviously, The response time is very good, it doesn't seem laggy or glitchy, but there are still some usability issues. So it's touchscreen only, and it's a big screen. So it actually means that for my driving position, if I want to reach this left side of the screen, I've actually kind of got to lean forwards to be able to touch these buttons. And because some of the icons are quite small and it's only a touchscreen, I have to use quite a lot of focus to make sure that I'm hitting the right thing down here, which is not ideal. It would perhaps be better if this screen was angled towards the driver, so it was a little bit easier to see and a bit easier to reach as well. It's also quite annoying that if you want to adjust the steering wheel or the door mirrors, then that is done through the infotainment screen. It's fiddly and annoying like it is on Teslas and other Polestars. And to use it, you need to use these touch sensitive sort of haptic buttons on the steering wheel here, and they are very inconsistent and very frustrating to use. It's especially annoying given that this side is for your adaptive cruise control, which is quite important and quite a big safety concern if you're on the motorway and trying to adjust the speed that you're going. In our tests, this side, for example, which can control things like the volume, or it can skip forward to the next track and what you're listening to, has just completely given up working at all. So this is very frustrating.
Polestar did say that this should be fixed by a software update, and since filming this review we have tested the updated car, but disappointingly it was still pretty inconsistent in the way it responded to pokes and prods on these steering wheel controls.
The driving position itself though, by the way, is not particularly high up. It definitely doesn't feel like a tall, commanding SUV-like driving position. It's certainly more on the lower down, sporty side of things. And whether that's a good thing or bad thing is likely down to personal preference. Anyway, one potential solution which Polestar could have used to rectify some of these usability issues is to make this rotary dial down here control more functions of the infotainment system. Because what a shame that you've got this perfectly placed, very high quality feeling and sounding rotary dial, but all it can do is adjust the volume or pause or play what you're listening to. It would be so much better if this let you hop between different menus or select different icons on the screen, because it would make using this far less distracting while you're driving. Anyway, it definitely isn't all bad in this interior, and you get a lot of equipment here as well. So you get a head-up display, you get a Harman Kardon sound system, and you also get really fancy ambient interior lighting, which is actually styled on planets in the solar system. So you can make it look like Neptune, which all adds to the plush feeling that you have sitting up front in the Polestar 4. And it's also really good when it comes to storage. You've got this big armrest here, which is nicely padded, and underneath it has a pretty decent cubby. There's this neat cup holder arrangement, which is easily disguised by this on top of it. There's wireless phone charging at the top of the center console, and underneath all of this, there's another open big storage compartment there, and the door bins are a reasonable size as well. So definitely loads to like up front in the Polestar 4, even though it's not perfect. Now, supposedly, the reason that there is no glass back here is because the designer of this car, Max Missoni, really wanted a coupe roofline on the Polestar 4. However, this kind of car still has to offer decent rear seat space, and so it's not particularly suited to a coupe roofline because you've got a big battery under the floor, which raises things up back here, and if you put a sloping roofline at the back, then that would really reduce the available room in these rear seats. And so the compromise was getting rid of the glass back here to try and make the packaging of this rear seat area more spacious for passengers. And the result is that the space on offer is properly palatial. You've got loads of legroom. Headroom is also very generous, and you've got a pretty much flat floor as well, and it really doesn't feel like a dark, claustrophobic, enclosed area without having a window behind you, because instead you've got some snazzy ambient interior lighting, you've got decent sized windows at the back, and you've got this huge sunroof that stretches all the way pretty much past your head. And so the result is that it feels really open, airy, and very comfortable in these rear seats. You've also got this fancy touchscreen down here, which lets you adjust things like the music and the climate control, and also the angle of your backrest, so you can sit more upright if you want, or you can lean back to have a more comfortable sitting position. And all of this really adds up into some rear seats that make things feel very, very luxurious. The Polestar 4 has a 526 litre boot, which for some EV context is a bit bigger than what you'd get in the back of a Kia EV6, but it is a little bit smaller than the boot in a Porsche Macan electric. There is a nice big opening you can see here. There's also hardly any loading lip at the front. There's also a useful amount of underfloor storage, including a very helpful deep kind of cubby compartment for the charging cables. You also get a height adjustable boot floor as standard, which is also great, but you can see it does leave you with quite a big step up at the back of the boot. If you want to maximise the load capacity that you have in the Polestar 4, you can remove this parcel shelf type thing and lower the rear seats. They split fold 60-40 rather than 40-20-40, that's what the Macan offers, but it's still clearly a pretty practical car. And there's definitely lots to like, unless you're a dog, in which case you'll need a different car. There are two versions of this car you can buy initially. There's a long-range single motor and a long-range dual motor. If you go for the single motor version, then as you'd imagine, there is one electric motor driving the rear wheels, and if you go for the dual motor version, that adds another one driving the fronts. And if you go for the dual motor Polestar 4, then you are getting the fastest production car that Polestar has developed to date. It has 536 brake horsepower and it can do 0 to 62 miles an hour in a claimed 3.8 seconds, which, sure, isn't quite as quick as the fastest version of the Macan electric at 3.3 seconds, but it is still absolutely rapid, and the way it builds speed is truly astonishing. We are in the single motor version of the Polestar 4, which is noticeably more sedate, but it can still do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 7.1 seconds, which is certainly quick enough, if nothing compared to the dual motor version. Both versions of the car get the same 100 kilowatt hour battery, which has a usable capacity of 94 kilowatt hours, and both also get a heat pump as standard, which should hopefully mean that heating the interior of the car in colder conditions can be done in a more efficient way than if they didn't have a heat pump. Anyway, when it comes to range, the dual motor version of this car has an official range of 367 miles. If you go for the single motor version, obviously it only has one electric motor, it's a little bit lighter, so from the same battery you have an official range of 385 miles. So both versions are very, very impressive when it comes to range, and both compare very well indeed to the equally impressive Porsche Macan electric. When it comes to charging speeds, this isn't as impressive as the range, because the maximum rate it can accept is 200 kilowatts, and compared to all of its rivals, that isn't the fastest out there. But it still means that in ideal conditions you can get a 10 to 80% top up in around 30 minutes. So this is very quick in a straight line. It can travel really far on a full charge, and it's relatively quick to top it up as well. But what's this actually like to drive? Well, the dual motor version is rapid point to point, but it's not quite as engaging as the very best performance SUVs or the very best performance cars, certainly. The steering is quite light and very darty off-centre. So what that means is you're constantly having to make these adjustments to maintain your line. And compared to a Macan electric, that offers more accurate steering, better body control. The handling overall is just better in that car. We're in the entry-level single motor version of the Polestar 4, and to be honest, with everything dialed down a little bit, this is a pretty tidy car on the road. It still has the overly alert steering that the dual motor has, but it's a little bit lighter, it has a pretty positive, sharp feeling front end, and it's a pretty nice thing to drive. For most people, this will be the Polestar 4 to go for. It is a shame though that you can't get adaptive suspension on the entry-level version of this car. You get it as standard with the dual motor, and with it, things are just tied down a little bit better. On the single motor, there's a bit more float to the ride over bumps and compressions in the road. So it's a shame you can't, as an optional extra perhaps, add that adaptive suspension setup. There's a firm edge to things. You can hear some thumps and thwacks from the suspension, but it's definitely not uncomfortable, even on these battered British roads. There aren't any trim levels to choose from, but it's not like Polestar makes this car very sparsely equipped to force you to add a load of optional extras. As standard, this comes with loads of equipment, and that includes heated and electrically adjustable front seats, all the cameras that we showed you earlier, and keyless entry. In the UK, the Plus pack also comes as standard, and that includes pixel LED headlights, a head-up display, and power reclining rear seats. It's good that you get lots of equipment as standard because this is not a cheap car. But to be fair, up at this price point against all the other electric SUVs that we mentioned earlier, this is actually priced fairly competitively, relatively speaking. So the single motor version of this car actually undercuts pretty significantly an equivalent version of an Audi Q6 e-tron and a Porsche Macan electric. Yes, it is quite a big jump up to the dual motor version, but even then, it only costs a bit more than something like a Kia EV6 GT, which is significantly less plush than this. So, the Polestar 4 is stylish, spacious and swift. It can travel very far on a full charge, and it's a lovely thing to sit in. The digital rearview mirror is not a positive, but luckily there are lots of other very good things about the Polestar 4. Thanks very much for watching this review. If you want to see another one, click up there and make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. And if you want to read our extended written review of the Polestar 4 and every other new and used car around, then click on that link to go to whatcar.com.